Good afternoon, sir. Can you see and hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Could we please turn to poll 00029641? We're at the 3rd of July 2013. So the same day, in fact, the evening of the email that I took you to before lunch. If we scroll down, please. There's an email from Roderick Williams to Rod Ismay and Leslie Sewell. And it's about the local suspense problem. I think, yes, you're not in this chain, are you? He says as follows. He says, here's my summary of my call with Andy Wynne. And it relates to its information about, I think, the 14 branch issue. Issue first surfaced at the Post Office Financial Service Centre on the 6th of February 2012 at the close of a branch trading period. The FSC might have proactively contacted the sub-postmistress or sub-postmaster given the size of the discrepancy. The FSC investigated, saw it look wrong and brought the account back to balance at no cost to the sub-postmaster. It says there, over the next few weeks, as the rest of branch trading data for the same period was processed, the other 13 branch anomalies were noted. Those other branches' accounts were brought to balance, again at no cost to the sub-postmaster. This was not perceived to be a significant issue, given the small number of branches affected and the small sums involved. And then it says, on the 6th of February 2013, the Willen sub-postmaster contacted the Post Office National Business Support Centre to report the same discrepancy in his branch trading as the previous year. So were you aware that this particular problem was, first of all, reported to the Post Office back in 2012, that it again, although they thought they had addressed it, appeared again in February 2013?
So I was aware of this as a bug, so I don't know how much detail I had on it. It would have been in one of the reports I got about the bugs.
But not just a bug, but a bug that lasted from 2012 on to 2013. If we scroll over the page, it was passed to Fujitsu between the 6th and 8th of February 2013 and was resolved in April 2013. So were you aware that the 14 branch issue or anomaly was an issue that lasted for well over a year and which was known to the Post Office at the time?
So I think in one of those documents it does explain how it happened, and I think it's triggered by the date. So it happens a year later, if you see what I'm saying.
Yes.
So I was aware of this bug, and I think I had information about this bug.
Could we turn, please, to poll 00027825? Still on the 3rd of July, same day, there's an email from Paula Venables, that second email. She says, ignore the note below, just getting mixed up with mails. I'm sure there are plenty of good reasons, but let me ask anyway. Could our two documents be shared with James Arbuthnot? They are clear. It might help his understanding. Do you recall what those two documents were at all?
I don't. Does it make it any clearer further down the email?
Well, it's not clear because that email says ignore the note below. So
right, yes. So no.
It may not be. But
mean,
there's a response from you above, and you say as follows: I think it's risky. It would depend on how open he is with us, if he listens, and whether we believe we have convinced him to amend his approach to media, MPs, etc.
So I don't remember this email, and I don't know which two documents Paula is alluding to. It could be our media brief. I don't know.
To continue a theme that we were discussing for most of the morning, this is again you being really part of that inner circle, advising Paula Venables not on whether a matter should go to the board, but should go to James Arbuthnot.
So I think in the run-up to meeting James Arbuthnot, yes, I was involved in that. Because I was the one meeting Janet and I was the one doing lots of the input into James.
And again, same question as I was asking this morning. What part of the job of a company secretary was that?
Well, it isn't the part of a traditional company secretary role. It's a role that seemed to have evolved because I got involved with Alice in the initial meeting with James Arbuthnot.
Thank you. And we're now quite a way, I mean, we started looking at emails
Yes.
from 2012, so this is a year on. Could we please turn to poll 0019217? We're now on the 8th of July. If we have a look down the first page, we can see there, at the bottom of the page, please, Sarah Paddison on behalf of Paula Venables on the 8th of July. As promised in my previous email, here is a copy of the final draft of the second site report. They took on board the majority of our comments over the weekend, but not all of them. The second attachment is an internal note detailing the remaining aspect of the report, which we believe are misleading or factually inaccurate. Would you have read the second site report at that point?
I think at this point I would have just sent the two things that Paul is asking me to the board. But I do believe I read the second site report.
And approximately around this time?
I can't be sure, but I would have imagined I would have done.
Where there is a report that is relevant to the legal and regulatory obligations of the company, would you generally have read that
Yes.
substantive report? If we scroll up, we can see that you then forward it to the Horizon Reading Room. Can you assist us with what that is?
So the board had a reading room. So this could well be a folder within the board's reading room.
And how would you decide whether it was something to go to the board or not to go to the board?
So here you can see that I'm being told to send it to the board.
Yes.
So it would have got sent to the board. If I wasn't sure, I would ask the chair.
Could we please turn to poll 000999149, please? Thank you. In the bottom of, over the page actually, the second page, we have an email that the inquiry's already seen from Mark Davis to Paula Venables. You're also an addressee, and he provides some thoughts on the next steps following the publication of the second site report and proposes various initiatives. If we scroll up, please, to page 1, we have a response from Paula Venables. She says, Mark, thank you for this. If you could do something similar, half a dozen points on what you think we need to do next, re your own areas and overall, it will help to find next steps, see below. Susan, re point 1 below, do you have a proposal / something in writing as to what the next legal steps are, or is this referring to the general conversation last week, re the external lawyer's code of disclosure? Do you recall an issue with the code of disclosure at this point?
No.
It then says, I spoke with Alice this morning. As I explained, and rightly, Alwyn and I need to give an oral update to the board tonight, and she would like a paper tabled and discussed next week at the board meeting. Could we scroll up, please? Susan Crichton says, we're working on through this, and we'll have thoughts later today which can feed in. Paula Venables says, do you mean everyone is, or are there multiple angles? If so, that's great. When would be a good time for a call? Susan Crichton responds, Alwyn, Hugh and I, it was Leslie as well, but she has gone to the House of Parliament. to help brief Joe S. Also, Angela is around, so we'll try and get her to help. So we saw the first email from Mark Davis. Was it, in your view, appropriate for Mark Davis, the head of communications, to be providing the kinds of thoughts that we've seen at the end?
Can we
yes,
go back
absolutely.
down?
If we scroll down. And what was your view of the role of Mark Davis at this particular time in the response to the Second Sight report?
So my understanding would be that Mark would be pulling together the PR response and all the communications response.
And there we see some substantive suggestions about the way forward, such as Second Sight will have to be involved. They have to position themselves with the MPs as crucial independent voice. We need to find ways of supporting them in areas where they do not have expertise. That support needs to look with them at all cases brought by MPs, etc. Did you have a view at that stage about whether it was or wasn't appropriate for the head of communications to be inputting in that way?
So I know that Mark had a lot of contact with MPs, and I think that was maybe part of his role as well. So that might be why he's picked up the MP piece. I think he's just sending some thoughts and saying, you know, these are my thoughts, what do you think?
And if we scroll up, we have in the first email a meeting with yourself at the very top of the page, please. Yourself, Hugh, and Susan Crichton. What do you recall of those conversations?
So I don't recall those conversations. I would imagine that if Alice has asked for a call and Paula wants to give her a verbal update that evening and she wants a board paper, I'm seeing my job here as coordinating that verbal update and then the board paper.
And if we scroll down the reference to the update to the board, it says update to the board tonight. So if we scroll down to the bottom of that page, there, I need to give an oral update to the board tonight and she would like a paper tabled. Do you recall there being a conversation with the board that night?
I don't, but if Alice has asked for it, it probably happened.
If we turn to poll 00027573, these are some minutes of a board meeting on that day. You've referred to this in your witness statement. It addresses an entirely different topic. It's the 2013-2020 strategic call.
Right, yes.
If we scroll down, we can see. So that's a conference call held on the 9th of July. And we can scroll down. There's no mention, and you've said in your statement, there's no mention in there of any Horizon-related issues.
No.
Would that have been the moment to have raised those issues, or was that a separate call?
So I think, no, this is a completely separate call, and I think this would have been earlier in the day.
Thank you. Do you think it's likely or unlikely that if there was a call later that day, there would be minutes of that call?
I think it's likely there would be a note of the call, not necessarily minutes, unless it was convened as a board meeting.
And who would have taken the note of the call?
It would likely to be me.
Thank you. Could we please now turn to poll 00297607? We're moving on now to the 11th of July. If we could scroll down, please. So this is the 10th of July, and the top one is the 11th of July, and this is an email that relates to Gareth Jenkins. And Roderick Williams is saying here to the external lawyers at Cartwright King, copying in Susan Crichton and others, do you have some suggested wording for how we break and we think that's Gareth Jenkins news to Fujitsu, including why it is a problem for you from a criminal law perspective? And if we scroll up, please, on the 11th, it's an email from Martin Smith at Cartwright King to Roderick Williams, Susan Crichton copied in. Simon is preparing a further advice about Gareth Jenkins as agreed. However, he touched on the Gareth Jenkins point in his earlier advice on the 8th. You're not copied into this correspondence. Were you aware at this time of concerns within the post office about the reliability of Gareth Jenkins?
No.
Could we please turn to poll 0014547? If we scroll down, please. This is the next day, the 12th of July. So the bottom of page 1 into page 2. We have an email there, Susan Crichton to yourself. Subject is board paper for circulation. Alwyn, if you can bear to read it quickly, please do, as I'm tired of it. And if we scroll up, please, a response from yourself. Sorry, I know you don't want to, but I have changed the recommendation in a few bits. Are you happy? And we'll come to look at the changes that are made. And then this is the response from Susan Crichton, which I took her to in her evidence, where she says, "Hi, you must have read my mind. Whilst I was walking the dog, I suddenly thought that it wasn't a good idea to mention bugs, so have changed that and also found another couple of typos. The recommendation is much better." So we saw there that the day before, there is that and the day before that, there's that chain of emails relating to the Gareth Jenkins issue.
Yes.
You are in contact with Susan Crichton, who was involved in the Gareth Jenkins issue. Did Susan Crichton, at this point, where you are discussing a board paper for circulation, mention concerns about the reliability of Gareth Jenkins?
No, I do not remember ever seeing any concerns about Gareth Jenkins or the clerk advice or at all.
Thank you. The paper that was sent to you is poll 0014541. And perhaps if we turn to page 3, and if we could keep page 3 on screen, at the bottom of page 3, please, so the recommendations, and then could we please also bring up on screen your amended version, and that is poll 0014546. Do you recall, in that email chain, you had told Susan Crichton that you had amended the recommendations?
Yes.
So this, on the right-hand side, is the original version. If we look on the left-hand side, if we could turn, please, to page 3 of that version, we can see there that the recommendations has now changed. It was originally, the board is asked to note the update and action set out above, consider whether the Post Office cease criminal prosecutions, request the Audit and Risk Committee to oversee the actions set out above, and it's now changed to note the update and action set out above and decide whether the Audit and Risk Committee should consider the position of the Post Office as a prosecuting authority alongside its work in September. So that second recommendation, the explicit recommendation to consider whether the Post Office cease criminal prosecutions, has been removed. Can you assist us with why that was removed?
So the ones on the left, they're the ones that were
That's the updated version that you returned to Susan Crichton
Okay.
on the left. The right-hand side is the version that you were sent by Susan Crichton originally.
So I can't. I only saw these two papers this morning.
Yes.
I can't really help with why I suggested the ones on the left and not the ones on the right.
The one on the left reflects the ultimate version that went to the board.
Okay.
Do you recall in July 2013 discussions about whether the Post Office ceases criminal prosecutions?
I don't. Is that in the main body of the report?
So that's 8.2, the recommendation.
So I can't remember.
Did you get involved? I mean, is this a typical example of you getting involved in what recommendations are made to the board? Is this unusual? Is this something we might see elsewhere or not?
I can't really comment. I'm having only seen this morning. I don't know why those two things change, or why I thought the left one was a better update for the board, or a better part of the board paper.
The question really was about whether that is something you would typically do to amend recommendations to the board, or to...
No.
No. So if you had made that change, would it have been an unusual change to have made?
I think so, yes. I mean, not this particular paper, but people did send me board papers and say, you know, and ask for my advice on how I thought that would land with the board, and whether there was enough information or they needed to take information out. But I don't specifically remember this one.
And do you have any recollection at this time of the board's views on ceasing prosecutions?
I don't, I'm sorry.
Could we please turn to poll 001919666? This is the same day, the 12th of July. This isn't an email that went to you, but this is just to assist us with the timeline of where we are. Roderick Williams is sending to Andrew Parsons, external lawyer, and a team of internal lawyers, the attached, which sets out the high-level issue with Cartwright, which Cartwright King, our criminal law solicitors, has identified with the Fujitsu evidence Gareth Jenkins has been providing in support of the criminal prosecution cases conducted for Post Office Limited. A more detailed note should arrive on Monday, which I'll forward to you once I have it. So again, we have there, that's the Gareth Jenkins advice that you referred to, that you say you didn't know about at the time. We just had an email chain about discussing a paper for the board. Is that a matter that you would have expected to have gone to the board had you known about it?
Absolutely.
Could we please turn to poll 000999200? Same day, 12th of July. You are there emailing Susan Crichton and Paula Venables, and you're providing them with a timeline. So this is events that are going to happen over the next week or so, I think. Is that right?
Yes.
Yes. So on the 15th of July, decide who's going to lead going forward. 16th, paper and discussion with the board. 16th, meeting with Second Sight and external lawyers. 17th, yourself to call AB, is that Alan Bates?
I assume so.
Read toxic cases and set up a face-to-face to understand which cases he believes are in this category, and a quick talk through with the Post Office lead. Can you assist us with what toxic cases is a reference to?
So I can't specifically, but I think I was saying that I would call Alan Bates and talk about the specific cases that he thought needed to be discussed face-to-face, because the Second Sight review. So they haven't done their interim report yet, have they? Or have they? Sorry,
not
I'm
yet.
bit confused by the timeline
sorry, they have,
here.
sorry, yes.
We have?
Yes.
Okay. So there's, and I'm...
So we're still going chronologically.
Okay, so...
There's been a discussion of the board paper, which is entitled Update following the publication of the report. And that's the discussion between yourself and Susan Crichton.
Yes.
We have on the same day email from Roderick Williams circulated internally and to Mr. Parsons about those Gareth Jenkins concerns. We're still on the same day, so after the report, and this is a timeline going forward.
So I can't remember this, and I'm reading it now and thinking, what would I have meant? I would imagine the contact with Alan Bates would be to find out which cases, because we've looked at spot reviews, 5 spot reviews from JFSA, but we haven't looked at individual cases, although some were in the spot reviews. So I think this is me going to Alan Bates and saying, which are the other cases that we need to talk about and to bring into the next piece of work.
Thank you. And looking at this timeline, on the 15th, that's in fact the day of Simon Clarke's substantive advice on Gareth Jenkins.
Yes.
The very next day, there is a proposed paper and discussion with the board on Horizon issues. And I would like to now just turn to poll 001225552. I'm going to skip to the 15th. So that's the date to decide who's going to go forward, who's going to lead going forward. If we please scroll down over the page to page 2. This is the day of the Jenkins advice. Susan Crichton is emailing Cartwright King lawyers, and you're copied into this. And she says, Martin, we have received the attached from the Criminal Cases Review Commission. Should you draft reply on our behalf, or should we refer them to you to reply on our behalf? If we scroll up, Mr. Smith from Cartwright King responds, you're copied in. I've asked Simon to draft a response tomorrow morning. That's Simon Clarke from Cartwright King. And then the email above that from Mr. Flemington, sent to the others but copied into you. Thanks, Martin. Presumably we need to give off the signals that we are proactive, doing all the right things regarding writing to people to keep the Attorney General and Criminal Cases Review Commission calm. Hopefully, if they see that, they may leave us to it for the moment. So this is a very significant, presumably a very significant period of time in your career. You've received a letter, the second site report's been received. You've now received a letter from the Criminal Cases Review Commission. Do you agree with that it was quite a significant moment?
So the problem I have here is I did not see the Clarke, I don't believe I saw the Clarke advice.
Yes.
And yet clearly the rest of these people on this email have seen the Clarke advice and are responding about because of the cases, they're going to take them back to the CCRC. But I am not a lawyer. I do not know what needs to go to the CCRC. So I haven't got the detail behind what's going on here.
But you have a board meeting the next day.
Yes, sorry.
Does that flag to you, the CCRC writing to you, that there might be some serious issues with cases that the Post Office has prosecuted?
So I would not have the detail of that. Susan Crichton and the legal team would have the detail of that. And my expectation would be if there was something in there that the board needed to know about, the board would be told the next day.
And they'd be told by Susan Crichton?
Yes.
Yes. Could we please turn to poll 000215516? And these are the board minutes of the 16th of July 2013. We see there that you are in attendance. If we scroll down, please. The one person who is not in attendance at this board meeting is Susan Crichton. Do you recall why Susan Crichton wasn't invited into that board meeting?
So was there a legal paper at this board meeting?
Well, I can, if it assists, her evidence was that she was kept out of the meeting.
So is this that? I do remember that meeting.
Yes.
This is that meeting.
This
yes?
is that meeting.
Okay. So, my practice was that I would go to the executive member who was coming to the board to present, and I would give them an approximate time when they needed them to be standing outside the door, basically. When the moment came for us to deal with their paper, I would stand up, go to the door, invite them in, and they would come and present their paper, and at the end of their presentation, I would get up, take them to the door, and bring the next person in if there was a next person. At this board meeting, and our boardroom had frosted glass, so you could see if there was someone outside. At this board meeting, Susan was waiting outside to come in, and as we started the board, it's not the first issue, I don't think.
No.
So
we could scroll down. The Horizon update is at page 6.
okay.
We had seen previous correspondence that identified Susan Crichton as the relevant person to speak to that issue.
Yes. So at the relevant point in the board meeting, I stood up and walked towards the door and was asked to hang on a minute, to sit down, because there was going to be, I assumed, a discussion before Susan came into the room. I mean, that did happen sometimes. If the board wanted a discussion on the paper before the executive member came in, that did happen. So I was asked to sit down.
If I could just stop you there, who asked you?
I believe the chair, but yes, I believe the chair, because it would have been the chair who would have said they needed to have a discussion.
Okay, so it was Alice Perkins.
I believe so.
Thank you.
So I sat back down, as I was asked to do, and then this part of the meeting progressed. I do believe that, and I don't know at what point, but at some point during this board update, I believe I said to the chair, do you want Susan in the room because she has the detail? And I was told no.
And this was a significant meeting because, as you have just explained, the CCRC have written to you the day before. You were copied into that. We've seen that Ms. Crichton was receiving very significant advice in relation to Gareth Jenkins. What explanation was given for her not being called into the room to address Horizon issues?
So I think in the minutes it says that if we just scroll down a bit. Yeah. Oh no, sorry, it's here. Sorry, it's at B. So the board were concerned that the review opened the business up to claims, and the board asked if Susan Crichton, as General Counsel, was in any way implicated. So as this conversation was going on and I was taking my notes, I assumed that it was because of that Susan hadn't been invited into the room.
Yes. Did anybody say why? Was
No.
there any discussion?
No.
Let's read a little bit about that, about what it says emerged from the meeting. So A, the CEO explains that although the second site report had been challenging, it had highlighted some positive things as well as improvement opportunities. So was it just the CEO who was addressing these issues, from your recollection?
So from these minutes, and I believe the CEO then took over responsibility for delivering this paper.
And then B, the board were concerned that the review opened the business up to claims of wrongful prosecution. The board asked if Susan Crichton, the General Counsel, was in any way implicated in the prosecutions. C, the board expressed strong views that the business had not managed the second site review well and stressed the need for better management and cost control going forward. Now, minutes don't always reflect precisely what is said at that meeting. Can you assist us with that comment? Was there a particular, it's a reference there to the business had not managed second site well. Was it the business that was the subject of their concern? Were there named people?
So I think, I believe if there had been named people, I would have put those in the minutes. So I think the not managing second site well, and you can see there the cost control, I believe the board thought, and I can't speak for them individually, obviously, but from this minute, I believe that the board thought second site review was taking too long, and that they weren't focusing in on what the board had originally thought they were going to focus in, which was basically the computer.
You were somebody who was, as we've seen, quite involved in liaising with Second Sight. Was there any criticism of you in this meeting?
Not that I can recall.
Did you infer any criticism of yourself?
I can't remember there being any criticism.
Did you infer, or was there any criticism of any specific named individuals?
Well, only the Susan Crichton bit at the top. Can we go down a little bit further?
Yeah.
Because they then go on to say the board accepted it was an independent review. But they still thought the business hadn't managed that review well.
And there's lots of reference to the business, the business, the business. Did they really just speak in terms of the business, or was there comment on the performance of particular individuals?
Not that I can recall.
We have their action, Susan Crichton. Was it normal for somebody to be listed as the action point, having not attended the meeting?
No, this is really unusual. It's really unusual that someone was left outside the door. It's really unusual for someone to get an action point without being in the room. It
being so unusual, why is there no reference to that fact in the minutes itself?
Well, there's reference that she is not in the room.
Where's the reference to her?
Because she's not on the list. She's not named as. There would have been at the beginning. Susan Crichton, General Counsel, joined the meeting. So.
But we have. If we scroll up to page 1. If we scroll down, we have apologies for absence. We don't have Susan Crichton's name there.
No.
We have in attendance, we have who is there. We don't have any reference to who's sitting outside the room waiting to be called in. And there isn't any reference throughout these minutes to the fact that the chair had asked for Ms. Crichton not to be called in. Is that something you would expect to find in the minutes of a board meeting?
No, I wouldn't.
So if somebody had been asked to attend but had been kept outside, you would not expect that to be minuted in the minutes?
So I wouldn't have expected to be no, because the board minute is what happened in that room, and she didn't come into the room, and that's now the board minutes were agreed by the chair, were agreed by the board at the following board meeting. So if anyone was uncomfortable with that, they would have said so.
But it wasn't just that she wasn't at the meeting. It was, as you've said, somebody specifically asked during the course of the meeting for her not to come in.
Yes.
Is that not a notable event that should be minuted?
I don't think so, but clearly it could have been minuted differently, but the chair and everyone who checked these minutes were happy that this was the way it was minuted.
But you're the company secretary.
Yes.
Are you responsible for the minutes or not?
Yes, I am responsible for the minutes.
Could we turn to page 6, please, and have a look again at the Horizon update? Did you, in this meeting, mention having received a letter from the Criminal Cases Review Commission?
No.
One of the things that you said to me earlier was that the General Counsel didn't need to attend all of the board meetings because you were personally in the reporting line. Did you consider whether at this particular meeting you should say something?
I didn't think I had the knowledge to say anything. I could have told them about a letter, but I couldn't have told them what that letter meant or what we were going to do about that letter. So I didn't have the expertise to raise that.
Irrespective of the CCRC issue, we've seen email after email after email copied to you, sent to you, asking for your opinion, relating to James Arbuthnot, relating to Second Sight. Did you not think that Susan Crichton not being in that meeting, you were actually quite an appropriate person to address the board on this issue?
So I think the appropriate person to address the board was the CEO, was Paula Venables, because she's addressing the board, and has most of the updates that I would have had.
Do you think that you had provided her with sufficient information to speak to all of those issues?
I'm not sure the CCRC, because that had happened, the day before or the same day or whatever. But I believe that Paula would have known the other issues with Second Sight and with, but that's my recollection now.
Could we just return to the first document that we saw this morning, and that's the expert report, EXPG 00000006, please. It's page 30. It's the bottom of page 29 into page 30, please. A company secretary's accountabilities normally include, and then we have E, arranging participation of non-board members for specific items in board discussions, including handling, sight of relevant minutes, timing of board appearances, follow-up. Do you think you failed in that on this occasion?
No, I don't. I had arranged for Susan to be there at the correct time to give her presentation to the board, and I was stopped from getting her into the room by the chair. So I actually do think I was doing what it says here.
Do you think that not raising any concerns about that, knowing that Susan Crichton was very well placed to speak to the Horizon issues, was in any way a failing on your part?
So I can't specifically remember, but I think I would have raised concerns with that after the meeting with Alice and possibly Paula.
You would have raised concerns?
I believe I would have done. I can't specifically remember, but having gone through that meeting where clearly Susan had been excluded from the meeting, I would have raised that, I believe, with the chair and with Paula.
And what did you say?
I can't remember. I specifically cannot remember.
I mean, it's quite a significant moment in time.
No, absolutely.
Both for your professional career, but especially for this inquiry. Do you recall any conversation with Paula Venables or Alice Perkins?
I can't recall any specific conversation, but my belief is that if that had happened, I would have spoken to, especially the chair, about how that meeting had been run and that someone was standing outside waiting to deliver a report.
We know that board work, it doesn't just occur at those formal board meetings. There are a number of people who attended that meeting and a number of non-executive directors, for example. Did you have discussions over lunch, over dinner, over a drink, over some other social activity with any of them, raising concerns about how that particular meeting was conducted?
Not that I can remember.
Did you have any discussions with them about the growing picture at the post office, concerns about the Criminal Cases Review Commission?
Not that I can remember.
Do you think that the board or members of the board were kept properly up to date and informed of those developments?
Well, and I don't know if it chronologically if it's in this order, but I wasn't I wasn't appraised of the clerk advice, and I don't believe that I don't believe I sent the clerk advice to the board, so therefore the board were not appraised of the clerk advice. So things should have been sent that weren't, I think.
And who do you place responsibility for that on?
Well, it has to be anyone who knew about the clerk advice. I mean, I don't know who the clerk advice was shared with, whether it was shared with the chair, whether it was shared with Paula. All I know is that I don't believe I received it, and I was not asked to send it to the board. So I don't know who made the decision for it not to go to the board, but I don't believe it ever went to the board.
Can we turn to poll 0019278, please?
Before we do, Mr. Blake, there's just one aspect of the minutes that I'd like to go back to, if I may.
Absolutely. Those minutes are poll 000021516.
And if we go to the section dealing with the Horizon update, which I think is page 6.
Yes.
So under B, the specific question is raised as to whether Ms. Crichton was in any way implicated in the prosecutions, and then there's a report of what followed. Could we now go to E, please, over the page? There's an explicit reference there, is there not, Ms. Lyons, to the board asking Ms. Reynolds if she had considered changing the person leading for the business, right? Now, the person leading for the business, we've been told, was Ms. Crichton. Was that your understanding?
Yes.
So is that the reason she was excluded from the meeting? Because, in effect, she was going to be criticised?
Possibly.
Thank you. Yeah, over to you, Mr. Blake.
Is it a little odd that she's not mentioned by name in E? I mean, you've said that if she had been mentioned, somebody had been mentioned by name, it would be in the minutes. It's a bit cryptic, isn't it? The person leading.
I don't think anything was meant by that. I think that's. I don't think it was. I can't remember these minutes. I don't think it was changed. You know, anybody said, "Oh, that shouldn't be mentioned by name." So I can't remember.
Could we now turn to poll 0019319? I'm going to skip out that other document. We're now moving to the 30th of July 2013, and an email from Simon Baker to you're copied in there. All you'll shortly receive an invitation to a Horizon Investigation Risk Workshop. The purpose of the workshop is to identify, quantify and produce mitigation plans for the risks associated with the Horizon investigation and related activities, including the improvement project to respond to the findings. Do you recall the Horizon Investigation Risk Workshop?
I don't, I'm afraid. I don't think I was a member. I think I was just being told it was happening.
Thank you. Could we turn now to poll 001935585? And this is advice from Bond Dickinson on the risks, principally to the directors of the company. Do you recall this advice?
No.
One of your responsibilities, I think, as company chairman, as company secretary, involved looking out for the kinds of risks that are discussed in this document. Is that right? If we look over the page, please, we can see section there, risks to post office, prosecutions and convictions. As noted above, where circumstances warrant, post office prosecutes sub-postmasters who have acted criminally. The basis of these prosecutions is often found in the transaction records recorded in Horizon. As a result of Second Sight's investigation/interim report, Post Office is reviewing all its criminal prosecutions over the last 3 years to identify any cases where a conviction may be unsafe. In particular, the expert evidence of one Post Office witness, Dr. Gareth Jenkins of Fujitsu, may have failed to disclose certain historic problems in the Horizon system. Under the criminal prosecution guidelines, Post Office has an obligation to disclose this previously undisclosed information to Sub-Postmasters Defence Counsel. Post Office is required to make these retrospective disclosures where the additional information may have undermined a prosecution case or assisted with an accused defence. By this stage, that is August 2013, were you aware of concerns about the reliability of Gareth Jenkins?
So I do not believe I saw this advice. I don't believe I sent this advice to the board.
Because over the page, on page 3, there's a section on D&O risks. And it says, we've considered whether a claim could lie against a director or officer of Post Office. We think this is unlikely, as it will be difficult for a sub-postmaster to pierce the corporate veil. Most of the above claims, if brought and if viable, would be against Post Office Limited as a company. Nevertheless, we can envisage the following possible scenarios involving directors and officers. And they set out there the possible claims that could be brought. Now, we saw in those board minutes that we looked at a concern amongst the board of their potential liability for matters arising from the Second Sight report. This seems to be a advice that addresses those very risks. Why do you think it is that this wasn't brought to your attention if it wasn't?
I have no idea, because this is exactly what the board were asking for.
And do you recall the board ever receiving that kind of advice?
So I believe there was a paper, I think written by Chris Day, about a D&O risk, but I do not think the board, or I certainly did not don't believe I received this, and I don't believe I sent it to the board. Again, I can't say if any board members saw this advice, as in the CEO or the chair. But
and separately, as at that time, so August 2013, were you personally aware of the concerns about the reliability of Gareth Jenkins' evidence?
No, because this document would have made that very clear as well.
Yes. Thank you. Can we please now, we're going to move on to autumn 2013. Could we please look at poll 00146545? And if we could start on page 2, the bottom of page 2. Bottom of the page, we have an email from Jarnail Singh to yourself saying, Alwen, for criminal prosecution and civil litigation cases, it is essential for Post Office to instruct expert witness to produce expert reports on the impact of Second Sight's interim report on the Horizon system. Please find attached both CV from Professor Kramer and Professor Dooley from Imperial College London, who have agreed to undertake the expert witness work. If we scroll up, we see a response from yourself saying, I think Leslie and Hugh should sign this off. Leslie, from an IT perspective, that these CVs mean they'll understand and be able to explain Horizon. At this stage where Jarnail Singh is specifically contacting you about 2 potential new experts, were you aware of concerns about the reliability of Gareth Jenkins?
So at this stage, I knew that I knew the business was not using Gareth Jenkins anymore, because I think something came up at an ARC meeting, and we talked about finding an expert witness. But there was no explanation as to why we were no longer allowed to use Gareth Jenkins or if he'd retired, or I didn't know that information. But we were asked, the board asked for this specific thing to happen, for us to go and find, and to find out how much it would cost as well, because that was the other issue that came up in the ARC.
And did no one ever ask the question, why aren't we using our old expert?
So I think I think it says somewhere that we can no longer use, and I don't remember ever being asked, well, why?
Ever asked or ever asking?
I don't remember ever asking. Someone says to you, we're not no longer doing that, we're doing this. Go away and sort that out. We were doing the go away and sort that out.
I mean, you had personally liaised with Gareth Jenkins over a number of years. Was it not surprising that you were moving on to new experts?
Well, I'd had probably a dozen emails from Gareth Jenkins when I was asking for things. I didn't know Gareth. I don't think I'd ever met Gareth. So I didn't read anything into it apart from we need a new expert witness.
Moving on to poll 001465548, please. On page 1, there's an email from Hugh Flemington. If we scroll down to Leslie Sewell and yourself. Thank you. Sorry, if we could scroll up. Topic being experts, horizon issues. And he says as follows: Susan was minded to slow this down. Brian Altman, our Uber QC, may recommend that the Post Office cease prosecuting altogether. Therefore, why waste time and money committing to this person? This piece of work is not widely known within the Post Office. Were you aware at that time of a piece of work that had been requested of Brian Altman, now Casey, relating to the potentially stopping prosecuting altogether?
I can't remember it.
Would it have concerned you that somebody described as the Post Office's Uber QC was advising on a significant matter relating to prosecutions, and that wasn't widely known?
So what I thought we were chasing here was a new expert witness, and that's the piece of work that I thought I was helping to coordinate by getting the CVs looked at or whatever. Now Susan is saying we might not be doing this anymore. I mean, I think in an earlier document there's something about ceasing prosecutions. So I'm not surprised that we are considering ceasing prosecutions, but if we are going to prosecute, we need a new expert witness.
Was that discussion, so the issue that was not widely known within the Post Office, was that known at board level, do you think?
I can't remember if it was ever taken to board that Brian Altman was doing this work.
And again, it's a small group of people, similar group to the emails that we've seen over the years in 2012 and into 2013. Is it surprising that at this stage you still are not aware of concerns that were raised about Gareth Jenkins?
Well, unless someone had shared that with me, I wouldn't have been aware. A lot of the people on these emails are the lawyers. I wouldn't have been aware unless someone told me.
Thank you. I'm going to now move on to 2014. Could we please turn to poll 001475542? I'll just go to a few documents from 2014, okay, and then we're going to move on to a separate subject of remote access.
Okay.
We have the second email from Alice Perkins to yourself. We're now in March 2014. and it relates to the Audit and Risk Committee papers. And she says, I can't attend this meeting, but I was looking at the papers to see the post-mortem / lessons learned from Horizon / Second Sight stuff. I thought we were told at the board last week that it was on the agenda for this meeting. What am I missing? Brain cells or paper or neither? And then you forward that to Belinda Crowe and say, I need to go back on this. I thought you had discussed the delay on this with her. Can you recall the context of this discussion?
So, and again, I'm assuming here, but I'm reading these emails and I'm thinking that on the original ARC agenda, there was a piece on there about Horizon Second Sight, post-mortem or whatever we want to call it, lessons learned, and that Alice was expecting that to be on the agenda, or wasn't expecting a paper. I clearly have taken it off the agenda on the advice of Belinda because it's either not ready or whatever. I've sent the papers out without it, and Alice is saying, well, where's the paper on Horizon Second Sight? I wouldn't have sent that paper, I don't believe, unless I thought that Belinda had had this conversation with Alice, because I knew, because I'd been in the board the week before, and I knew that Alice was expecting this to come to ARC.
Thank you. And one final document before we move on, and that's poll 00147-834. We're still in 2014, we're in March 2014, and you are there giving thoughts on advice received from Linklaters. Can you assist us with why you were there giving your thoughts on
So
advice?
I would only have given my thoughts, I think, if I'd been asked. Because I'm sending it direct to Chris, I was asked by Chris rather than Chris and Paula, but clearly I've sent it to both of them. And I have gone through the Linklaters advice and given them, I've been asked for my opinion, I think, on how the board will respond to the Linklaters advice. And that's what I've done here. But it's only my opinion. The board might not have responded like this, it's just my opinion.
I'd just like to go through a few of those, and if we could bring up on screen alongside it the Linklaters advice, and that is poll 00107-317, please. Thank you. So if we could turn to 1.2 on the left-hand side, so that is, I think, the second page. Thank you. So the Linklaters advice, do you recall the circumstances in which the Linklaters advice had been sought?
So I think the board had asked for advice on the sub-postmaster's contract and the sub-postmaster's contract and whether the sub-postmaster's contract enabled the post office to get money back from sub-postmasters over losses. I think that's me paraphrasing it, but...
And they say on the left-hand side, the relationship between sub-postmasters and the post office is governed by the standard form contract, which, according to its terms, allows the post office to recover losses and is terminable on 3 months' notice without the need to specify a reason. The relationship between the sub-postmasters and the post office is one of principal and agent, and the sub-postmasters are not employees. There is no broader duty of care which would extend the contractual duties owed by the post office in any respect relevant to the issues in this report. And your comment is as follows. It's 1.2, said in this way, is exactly the heavy-handed big business versus small sub-postmasters that James Arbuthnot thinks we are guilty of. Mm-hmm. So this is talking about the relationship between sub-postmasters, and James Arbuthnot is concerned that it's a heavy-handed relationship. Was that shared amongst the board? Are you summarising here what you think the board's views are, or are they your own views?
So this was shared with Alice, certainly at her first meeting with James. And I can't remember whether she shared that. She gave an update to the board. I'm not sure. I can't remember whether she shared that with the board or at any of the other meetings that we've seen today, whether it was mentioned. Sorry, I've
Was that a
got question.
concern, though? I mean, was it something that you ever discussed with the CEO, the chair, senior executives about a heavy-handed big business versus small sub-postmaster relationship?
So I think it might have been a concern for the chair because of the conversations that she'd had with James. Wider than that, I can't really say.
Okay. 1.4, absent such proof that Horizon is not working as it should, the Post Office should be able to recover losses which the Horizon records indicate are owing on an individual sub-postmaster's account. If the Post Office is entitled to recover losses, then there can be no question of a consequential loss claim on the part of the sub-postmaster relating to their recovery. And you say the board will be in different places. NM, is that Neil McCausland?
Yes.
So he was a non-executive.
He was the SID as well,
He was the
senior independent director.
Thank you. We'll say good, then we can put the lid back on the can of worms and pay very little. AP, that's Alice Perkins, is it?
Yes.
Will be more concerned about political optics. Is this an insight we get into the different positions in the board on paying money to sub-postmasters or
I
recovering
mean,
money?
these are just my thoughts of how I think they would respond. So, you know, they may have responded very differently, but these are just, you know, this is how I think they will respond when they read this document. And Alice was always concerned about the political optics and making sure that we took account of what MPs were saying, etc., etc. And Neil was much more pragmatic, I suppose, about you know, how do we take this forward.
The suggestion, though, being that he was also concerned about not paying very much.
I think everyone, I think the whole board were concerned about the cost.
Thank you. If we scroll down the left-hand side to 2.3, importantly, Joe Swinson, the Parliamentary Under-Secretary of State for Employment Relations and Consumer Affairs, noted that there was no evidence of a systemic problem with Horizon. This has also been the Post Office's conclusion on the information so far available to it. We know that there is, so far as we understand it, no objective report which describes and addresses the use and reliability of Horizon. We do think that such a report would be helpful, though there is a decision to be made about how broad and or thorough it needs to be. And your comment on that, if we have a look at, yes, on the right-hand side, is it's unhelpful because it suggested we should have taken a different route and commissioned such a report rather than use Second Sight. So why didn't we?
Sorry.
No, you carry on, please.
So that comment there is how I think, my thoughts of how I think the board will respond, because we've already had in a board meeting the suggestion that business hasn't managed Second Sight and it's all taking too long, and etc., etc. So I think 2.3, because 2.3 on the left-hand side is suggesting that we need to do a more in-depth report to address the use and reliability of Horizon, I think the board will be frustrated because they thought that's what they were getting with Second Sight.
Thank you. If we stick with the left-hand side and scroll down, let's go to 5.30. Sorry, it's 5.30, so it's on a bit more. 5.30. page 8. Thank you. So 5.30 says, it is the reliability of the Horizon system as a matter of principle which is important. If there are doubts about the reliability of the system, then this could obviously impact on the Post Office's ability to claim losses, since it calls into question whether such losses exist at all. This is the fundamental question, and one which has not yet been satisfactorily addressed. And you say this will worry them, as we have said all along that there is no systemic issue with Horizon. This may make them think there may be an issue, and why hasn't the business undertaken a proper forensic review / audit? So you had here received advice from Linklaters questioning whether in fact the Post Office had properly looked into the reliability of Horizon. And you were concerned that that would worry the board.
Well, it's sort of the same point as 2.3 that we talked about earlier, is that this is now saying that we need a proper forensic review of Horizon before we can say it has integrity.
And if we scroll down, please, to 5.55, this is the last paragraph we'll look at in this document. .55, please. Page 13. 13. Thanks. 5.55. The Post Office, in its capacity as a prosecutor, has duties of disclosure which extend beyond the date of conviction in any particular case. And it cites a case there. It was observed that private prosecutors are subject to the same obligations to act as a minister of justice as the public prosecuting authorities. Any material in the possession of Post Office which might cast doubt on the safety of any conviction ought therefore to be disclosed to a convicted party. And your comment on that is this will cause concern again as it reopens the Post Office as a prosecutor, even if that is not what is being said. Is it fair to say that as at March 2014, you were concerned that the board would not be happy with the Linklaters advice, both because it raises issues with the reliability of the Horizon system, the reliability, the fact that there hasn't been a comprehensive report addressing Horizon, and also that it raised issues relating to the Post Office's prosecution role?
So, as I said, this email is me assuming what the board will think. So that's a bit dangerous, but that's me assuming that's what they will think. And what I've tried to do in the report is highlight the areas that I think will cause concern for the board. Yeah. And the main concern, I think, is that the Linklaters report seems to be saying this is all fine, you can reclaim monies, etc., etc. However, you have to prove first that Horizon's integrity. And I think, firstly, the board thought we were doing that with Second Sight, and that's clearly not enough. So what I've tried to say, and the prosecutor piece, because this 5.55 is referring to the Clark advice and Gareth Jenkins. Well, I hadn't seen that. I didn't believe the board had seen that. So I'm not when I say reopens the PO as a prosecutor, I'm not reading that as the Clark advice. I'm reading it as, Post Office has a capacity as a prosecutor. And I believed we were already doing some work to understand how we would change that.
And looking back now at when that report ultimately went to the board, do you recall concerns that you had expressed in that email arising or not arising?
I honestly can't remember.
Okay, thank you. So I only have one more topic to address before handing over to core participants, but I think that might be an appropriate time to take our mid-afternoon break.
Certainly. All right. So we'll resume again at
3:30.
3:30, okay?
Thank you very much. Thank you. Moving on to the topic of remote access.
Okay.
Could we start with poll 000295989, please? And second page, please. Over the page. An email from Paula Vennells to yourself. She says, Alwyn, thanks for the various documents coming through in enormous volume. Hopefully you'll be reaching the end soon. How did the call go this morning regarding James Arbuthnot with Second Sight, and has Janet been in touch? If we go over the page to page 1, at the very top, we have an email from yourself to Paula Vennells. And you say, okay, here goes. Good call with Second Sight, but James has definitely caused confusion with his cases or themes or topics, etc. Second Sight have agreed that they will look into 3 cases. They will tell JFSA which 3 cases to keep them on board, but Second Sight are choosing which. One of these will be dealing with the issue of remote access to a sub-postmaster's account, which James specifically raised. I have just spoken to Leslie, who has engaged Fujitsu today and is confident that within a week they will provide evidence about access and audit trails, etc. Leslie and I will meet Fujitsu on the 3rd to go through this, and then if we are comfortable, go through with Second Sight and Fujitsu on the 6th, so let the technical people can discuss the detail. So as at the May 2013, you're aware of a specific interest in the issue of remote access.
Yes.
Could we look at poll 000295990, the bottom, second page, sorry. We're now in June, 4th of June. An email from Martin Edwards, Chief of Staff to Paula Vennells. He says, as you know, Paula is seeing Alice tomorrow. She's asked if you can provide an update on the latest state of play with James Arbuthnot et al. And your response is above that. And I'll just read to you a couple of passages from your response. You say, SS Second Sight are now working on the 3 cases as agreed, which include the Rudkin case, where he alleges that he heard someone at Fujitsu state that they could alter a sub-postmaster's account. Leslie and I had a meeting with Fujitsu this week, and they are providing us with an audit trail of adjustments which can be made centrally, which they say happens very rarely, so we are waiting to see that and the controls in place. However, they suggest that what Rudkin heard was testers from Horizon Online referring to test data and not a live environment. This would be good if we could prove it. The plan is to look at the audit trails and then have a joint meeting with us, Second Sight and Fujitsu. So you're specifically there raising the issue of Mr. Rudkin's case and remote access to Paula Vennells, or Paula Vennells is Chief of Staff.
Yes.
Poll 000296001. We're moving to the 11th of June now, and this is an email from Ron Warmington of Second Sight in advance of a call the next day. And he says, I'm afraid only 2 of the 7 documents that you've enclosed seem to be relevant to SR 005. That's Mr. Rudkin's case,
Yes.
the remote access case. The other 5, in themselves excellent documents that were enclosed, all relate to Horizon Online, which, as is explained in Gareth Jenkins's affidavit, was rolled out between January and September 2010. They're therefore irrelevant to SR 005. Do you remember this morning I was mentioning an email from Mr. Warmington that was concerned with over-disclosure of irrelevant material?
Yes.
And then if we scroll down, he raises a concern. He says, luckily we picked up the basic error at this point and not while presenting our interim report to a roomful of MPs. Over the page, please. I'm really looking forward to tomorrow's call, but we need to produce something that is crisp, easy to understand, and that absolutely nails this really serious allegation once and for all. Do you recall Second Sight being determined to get to the bottom of that remote access issue as well?
Yes, I think they were, but I think the business were as well.
if we move on to the 24th of June, that's poll 001888912. This is an email I took you to earlier, but I said I'd come back to it. If we scroll down to the second email, it's Simon Baker to yourself, Susan Crichton, and Leslie Sewell. And in relation, he's had a call with Ron and Ian, SR 005, so the same case, the Rudkin case. They're very unhappy and angry with our response to SR 005. Post Office haven't answered the questions, just spouting out the same old line. We need to sort this out in the next few days. I've taken the action, provide them focused information which should provide them what they need, although I'm concerned about the time I have to gather it. And the response above from yourself, you email Leslie Sewell and say, Leslie, I think you're going to have to get involved in the Bracknell one or we're going to lose the argument. So you're escalating it there with Leslie Sewell.
Yes.
Do you recall Second Sight being unhappy and angry at this stage?
Only from documents that I've been sent from the inquiry. I don't recall this specifically. But all I'm doing here is saying, you know, Second Sight clearly are not getting what they want. Leslie, you own the relationship. You've got to get involved.
Thank you. And then we have the interim report that was ultimately produced. That's poll 000999063. And that's the 8th of July 2013. This is their interim report. If we look at page 12, it addresses Mr. Rudkin's case. Spot review SR05. And if we go over the page, 1.7, for example, it's unfortunate that due to the length of time that has elapsed, neither the Post Office nor Fujitsu were able to identify any individuals who met with the sub-postmaster. And then they refer to this, managing to find an email proving that the meeting took place. Unfortunately, due to a change in email systems, email from 2008 have yet to be provided to us, but they've reviewed some of the relevant material. And then if we look down at 1.14, this is how they end their review of Mr. Rudkin's case. They say, we are left with a conflict of evidence on this issue and our inquiries are continuing, particularly in the light of new information confirming that the meeting on the 19th of August 2008 did in fact occur. So concerns prior to the Second Sight's interim report raised by Second Sight about the lack of information or lack of clarity on the remote access issue. And in fact, there's no greater clarity by the time they've produced their interim report. They make clear that it...
Yes.
Yes. Moving on in time, please, to the 30th of April 2014, could we please look at UKGI 000193321? And this is a board meeting which you are in attendance. And if we could please turn to page 6, there's now reference to the Deloitte report. Now, do you recall discussion about the Deloitte report?
I do, yes.
And was one of the purposes of the Deloitte report to assist with that issue of remote access, to get greater clarity in that?
So I think the main purpose of the Deloitte report, from my memory, was that whereas the Linklaters report had given us information about the contract, it was predicated on that Horizon had integrity. So I believe the Deloitte report, and there were two halves, I think, because one was New Horizon, and then there was some look at old Horizon, but that came later. But I believe the Deloitte report was asked for to fill that gap.
And was one of those gaps in corporate knowledge to do with the remote access issue?
So I can't specifically remember that, but it may well have done.
Do you recall getting any greater clarity after the interim report on that very issue?
After the interim report?
Yes. So we've seen the interim report ended up without a clear
any,
picture.
Yes. So no, I don't think the interim report moved us forward at all.
So we have here the board discussing the Deloitte report. This is in advance of the Deloitte report. And it says the board welcomed Leslie Sewell and Gareth James, who was a partner at Deloitte, to the meeting. Chris Oyar also rejoined the meeting. The chairman thanked Gareth James for his draft report and explained that there were a number of people who were sceptical about Horizon. The board were concerned to know the truth about the reliability of the system. Deloitte's views would need to be expressed in such a way that they would persuade reasonable lay people. It might be suggested that that last sentence there is suggestive of trying to direct Deloitte in a particular way to persuade people. Is that your understanding of those words?
My understanding of that is that it needs to be written in such a way as people can understand it, and that's what I'm reading into that. So make it accessible, is I think.
Thank you. And then E, Chris Oyar explained that several of the sub-postmasters who were challenging Horizon had made allegations about phantom transactions which were non-traceable. Assurance from Deloitte about the integrity of the system records logs would be very valuable. The board asked what assurance could be given pre-2010 when the different Horizon system was in use. It was agreed that Gareth James would produce and cost a proposal for additional work to enable assurance for the wider system, including pre-2010. There was then a further board meeting that followed the report, and that, can we please turn to poll 000021525. That is the board meeting of the 21st of May 2014. Do you recall that board meeting? I can take you to the relevant part. So it's page 9, there's a section on Sparrow. And we see there, if we scroll down, reference there to the draft executive summary of the Horizon Assurance Review having been circulated to the board. I want to see how these minutes were drafted.
Okay.
Could we turn to poll 003843888, please? And it's the second page. It's an email from yourself to Chris Oyar and Belinda Crowe. Thank you very much. Now, this is the 23rd of May. So we've seen there the meeting itself was the 21st of May. Presumably, the minutes themselves are not typed up on the 21st of May. There is a process that follows that meeting. We're now on the 23rd of May, which is the date that the Deloitte report was actually produced.
Okay.
So that is what we refer to as the final Deloitte report, although I think on the front it says that it's a draft for discussion or something along those lines. You are emailing Chris Oyar and Belinda Crowe, and you say as follows: "It's a bit smoke and mirrors, but here are the minutes. Comments ASAP, please." Now, I think in your witness statement, you've said that there's no issue with the word smoke and mirrors. You didn't mean anything by it. Is that correct?
Well, clearly it's very unprofessional, and I shouldn't have put it in the email. I seem to recall that when I escorted Belinda and Chris out of the meeting, because the conversation had been quite cyclical, and in terms of Sparrow, and Belinda, I believe, turned to me and said, "Oh, good luck with minuting that." And I'd said to her, "It's a bit smoke and mirrors." And I stupidly had carried the conversation onto this email. But it's unprofessional and it shouldn't have happened.
But, I mean, smoke and mirrors is suggestive of, in some way, misleading.
Yeah, no, that's not what I meant, and my minutes were not misleading.
What you are doing, though, is you're sending to Belinda Crowe and Chris Oyar draft minutes that they are then amending.
So my practice was that I would take verbatim notes wherever possible, and when the conversation was cyclical and that became quite difficult, but they were taken, I would then draft the minute, and it would be sent out to the executive member, or Belinda wasn't an executive member, but the executive member who was responsible for the input to that part of the minute of the meeting. I would then. They would then give their input. I would then get that back, and I would revisit my verbatim notes to check that actually their input had come to the meeting first and that it was accurate. So that was my practice, and then after that had happened, the minute would go to the chair for their input.
So if we scroll up, we can see that Belinda Crowe has responded, and she says, comments from me and Chris comments from me, but Chris will need to agree. We're going to be speaking shortly. And if we scroll down, we can see, now they're in a slightly different colour, I think, the comments. We might be able to see them. If we scroll down, please, under Sparrow, can you see? It's a little difficult to see, but the comments seem to be in a slightly less dark format. So it has been amended here as follows. It was reported that, and then the draft executive summary of the Horizon Assurance Review prepared by Deloitte had been circulated to the board. Chris advised that it was anticipated that the full review would be available to the business on Friday the 23rd of May, and that he would circulate it to the board, and it's this addition that I'd like to ask you about, as soon as possible, but only when he was satisfied with its drafting and the clarity of expression. It was agreed that he would escalate within Deloitte if he had concerns about the quality of the product. Now, that was added on the day that, in fact, he received, that Chris Oyard and Belinda Crowe received the report itself. So they are amending minutes referring to a report that they have now received.
I didn't realise that.
No, and do you see an issue with that?
I would if I didn't believe that I went back to my verbatim notes and checked them.
I mean, is it possible that those words that are highlighted there were not actually spoken at that meeting?
Well, we do say that we want them to be clear, don't we? We want them to be, we want them to be understandable.
Sorry, it's the second, yes.
Yes, yes.
So it's him saying, in essence, that he would escalate to Deloitte if he had concerns about the quality of the product, and the board might not be receiving it when he receives it.
Yes. With hindsight, knowing that they received the report on the same day, that might be an issue. If Belinda and Chris are responding to this having read the report, then that's a completely different mindset to just responding to this as this is what they believe they told the meeting. I do think I would have gone back and checked my verbatim notes, and if this hadn't been in there at whatever height, whatever level, I would have gone back and challenged Chris and Belinda. I don't remember doing that.
Are the number of changes unusual?
So
if we scroll down, we can see more over the page as well. So there is a lot of information being put in by Belinda and Chris, who obviously wanted as much information in here as possible. Or wanted to direct how the minutes would read.
Well, I believe I went back and checked my notes, and a lot of this information might have been in their report, and my practice was not to regurgitate the report in the minutes because the board had the report. So
they didn't yet have the report, though, did they?
They had a report. They brought a report to this meeting, didn't they?
They had an executive summary at the meeting.
Yes.
The report would follow, and the words that were inserted were to the effect that they wouldn't necessarily receive the report straight away.
Right. So this does look as if there have been a lot of additions. However, my practice, as I say, was to go back and check my verbatim notes. And if I hadn't heard this at the meeting, I would have gone back to Chris and Belinda and said, actually, you didn't say any of this. You can't just have it in the minutes.
Thank you. Let's look at the report very quickly. It's POL 000288062. It's page 31. Did you read the Deloitte report?
So I'm not sure that I saw the long Deloitte report. And therefore I'm not sure the board saw the long Deloitte report.
And given that you had a governance aspect of your role,
Yes?
why would you not have read the Deloitte report?
Because I'm not sure it was given to me.
Having read it now, is it not a document that you recognise?
I don't recognise it.
Could we turn to page 31, please? Thank you. And it's the bottom there. I don't know if you've seen me go through this or anybody go through this with other witnesses, but it's G. A method for posting balancing transactions was observed from technical documentation, which allows for posting of additional transactions centrally without the requirement for these transactions to be accepted by sub-postmasters. Whilst an audit trail is asserted to be in place over these functions, evidence of testing of these features is not available. Third bullet point, for balancing transactions, we did not identify controls to routinely monitor all centrally initiated transactions to verify that they are all initiated and actioned through known and governed processes or controls. And the final one, controls that would detect where a person with authorized privileged access used such access to send a fake basket into the digital signing process could not be evidenced to exist. Looking at those now, are those matters that you would have expected to have been brought to your attention, given your involvement in the remote access issue?
Yes. I mean, the first one there is interesting because it doesn't. The first one there doesn't say without the knowledge of the sub-postmaster, because it says the sub-postmaster hasn't got to accept them, but it doesn't say without the knowledge of the sub-postmaster. So I believed at this point that the sub-postmaster could see everything in their account, every, like I spoke earlier about keystroke, every transaction. And even if they were sent a transaction correction and the process changed because they used to have to accept them, even if they were sent them and now we don't have to accept them, they would still see them. That was my understanding at this point. However, I do not remember seeing the long Deloitte report. I remember the board summary, which came to the board at a later date.
And that's what I would like to ask you about, that summary and the way that that was drafted. Could we please turn to POL 003463991, page 2 and into page 3. You're copied in here, an email from Chris Oyard to Paula Vennells and others. Dear all, following 2 longish calls that I've had with Deloitte today, they've now come back in the email below with a revised statement of the deliverable that they are proposing to produce for us. If the general consensus is this is okay, I would propose to ask Alwyn to circulate the email to the board with the following message from me. Do you recall a process by which Deloitte were going to be drafting effectively a summary of the report? Or
From reading these emails, yes.
Yes, but do you recall it at the time? We have below that the email from Gareth James, which sets out deliverables. these seek to create a shorter document for you intended for board circulation, which focuses on certain key and most relevant aspects of our wider work to date. Could we please turn to poll 003463996? There is then, on that page, we see an email from yourself to Paula Venables. Paula, do you want this to go to the board this evening as written by Chris, or should it wait until he has answered the questions in the morning? She said we should certainly refer to the pre-post, as otherwise it will look like we've forgotten it. Do you recall that an issue relating to, I think, Legacy Horizon and Horizon Online, and not enough detail on that issue?
Yes, because Deloitte were, in fact, I think they've been asked to do one report, but then tell us whether they were able to and how much it would cost to do a report on Legacy Horizon.
Thank you. Could we turn to poll 0034646? This is a very early email from, early in the morning email from Chris Oyard, 30th of May. You're copied in to Gareth James at Deloitte. We've discussed at some length the need to provide as much comfort as possible in respect of the period prior to 2010. For clarity, could you kindly confirm that you still propose to do this? 2, on the question of audience for the document, this is principally the board in the first instance. As discussed, we will, however, want to be able to use any high-level conclusions you may reach as a foundation for release of the Linklaters advice. At this stage, we're not sure what form we would need your conclusions to be expressed in. And 3, the proposed timing does not work for us. It seems as though there was some anger towards Deloitte about the time that it was all taking. Is that correct? Was that your recollection?
Yes. Sorry.
Yes. I'll summarise really where we get to from there. There is then produced the summary for the board, and the summary does not set out the information that I've taken you to before about remote access.
Okay.
Do you recall the summary being provided and any discussions about how that summary would be drafted and whether it should or shouldn't include more detail about remote access?
I don't recall that, and I haven't seen any papers that suggest I'm part of that conversation.
Thank you. I'm going to move on now very quickly to the SWIFT review. Could we please bring up on screen poll 001533835? We're in 2015, 18th of December 2015. An email from Mark Underwood to yourself. Over the page, please, or down to the bottom and the top of page 2. There we go. Hi, Alwyn. Thank you for providing Patrick with the minutes for the Sparrow subcommittee meeting and the extracts from other board meetings relevant to Sparrow. I will forward these on to Jonathan Swift, QC, this afternoon. As one would expect, numerous papers and reports are cross-referenced within these minutes. Can you recall assisting with the provision of information to Jonathan Swift?
Not specifically, but now that I've seen this, yes, I can recall that.
Can you recall ever reading his report, his ultimate report?
I don't think I ever saw his report.
Did you ever discuss his report or the drafting of his report with any senior executives at the Post Office?
No.
Would a report of that nature be something that you would expect to know about or to be told about or to read?
So can I just clarify, is this the report that Tim Parker, when he became chairman, was asked to?
Yes.
So I never saw this report, and I don't remember Tim Parker ever sharing that report with the board.
So you were, to some extent, involved in the provision of information?
Yes.
But do you remember any other involvement other than that?
No.
No. Did you ever discuss it with the chair?
So I believe the chair made it very clear that he'd been asked to do this independently, and therefore there was no discussion about it.
Thank you. And very finally, your resignation, could we just turn to poll 000215549. 25th of July 2017, we have a board meeting, and it's at page 4. The CEO explained that the decision, it's at that meeting, in fact, that the CEO explained that decision not to prosecute agents, if they could use the Horizon system as a defence, would be reconsidered once Deloitte had completed their work on Horizon and could be used in court as an expert witness. Was this also the meeting at which you retired? Yes, if we go over to page 7, so at that same meeting where there was discussion about not prosecuting agents, it has resignation and appointment of the company secretary. Can you briefly assist us with the reasons for your retirement?
So they were personal reasons, because we'd had 2 bereavements in the family, close family, and one very ill person in my close family, and I needed to be at home supporting them rather than commuting up to London.
Thank you. So those are all of my questions. There are some questions from Mr. Jacobs and also from Ms. Shah on behalf of the National Federation for Sub-Postmasters.
All right.
Shall we start with Mr. Jacobs?
Yes, certainly.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
I can hear.
Can you hear me now, Miss Lyons?
I can.
I'd like to take you to a document, please. POL 000581155. And while that's waiting to come up, I should tell you I represent a large number of sub-postmasters, sub-postmistresses and assistants who were affected by this scandal and are represented by Howe & Co. So this is a document, and if we could call about a story, and it will be made clearer. Could we go, please, to page 2 of 3 at the bottom of that page? And it's an email from Hugh Flemington, if we could scroll down, 24th of July 2012, to Susan Crichton, yourself and Simon Baker. This is the story text which Jay put together, and we can see that Jay is Jarnail Singh. Following our meeting last week, any comments, please, before we release it? And so the story from Mr. Singh is entitled Second Sight Review Draft. And to summarise it, the first paragraph says that Post Office are going to undertake a review. Second paragraph says Second Sight are going to be instructed, and it will focus on cases raised by members of Parliament, and that JFSA want their own forensic accountant to monitor the work of Second Sight. That accountant is Kay Linnell. But I want to focus on the third paragraph, please, so if we could maybe highlight that. And I'll read, all of the above is accepted based on the terms of the review being carried out, but it must be stressed that this is not an acknowledgement by the Post Office Limited that there is an issue with Horizon. The Horizon system is working properly, robust, and is being used up and down the country. And then, importantly, when the system has been challenged in the criminal courts, it has been successfully defended. I want to ask you about that last statement. When the system has been challenged in the criminal courts, it has been successfully defended. And what I have to suggest is that that's not true. Would you agree?
So at this point, I would have, as Mr. Singh is the criminal lawyer, I would have accepted that that what he was telling me was the truth.
You would have accepted that it was or wasn't true?
Was the truth at that point, because he's telling me that this is what's happened in the criminal court.
Well, were you aware that Suzanne Palmer, who is a client who we represent and who was one of the case studies in an earlier phase of this inquiry, had been acquitted by a jury in Southend Crown Court in January 2007, and she had asserted in her defence that the Horizon system had prevented her from challenging any Horizon figures which she hadn't agreed. There had been, at her trial, a jury question directed at the Post Office to the effect of, what is Mrs. Palmer supposed to do if she didn't agree or doesn't agree with the figure that Horizon produced? And the Post Office had been unable or unwilling to answer that question. So an acquittal in relation to a sub-post mistress who challenged the Horizon system in January 2007. Quite a significant event.
Yes.
Is that something that you were aware of?
So I don't believe I was aware of that.
Okay. Moving on, you may give the same answer, but I need to put it to you. Also, in 2006, in Northern Ireland, in Dungannon Court, Maureen McKelvey, another one of our clients, was acquitted by a jury, and in her trial, it came to light that an area manager had experienced problems with balancing on the Horizon system at Miss McKelvey's branch terminal, and she had maintained right from the start that the losses that were alleged were due to errors on the computer system. Is that something that you knew about?
Not that I remember, no.
Now, the inquiry, you may or you may not know this, has heard evidence from the Post Office investigators in both of those cases, Miss Allen and Miss Winter, and they not only attended the hearings, attended those trials, they gave evidence against our clients, and they were present when the jury delivered their verdict. Is that not something that you knew?
No.
And did you consider, or did Miss Crichton consider, or did Mr. Baker consider that it would have been appropriate before accepting this statement or putting this out, that there should be some fact-checking that went on?
So, yeah, absolutely. I would have expected, if there was any doubt in this last sentence here from Mr. Singh, I would have expected other members of the legal team to challenge that, either Mr. Flemington or Miss Crichton, and to say this is not a correct statement.
Well, we'll go, if we could just go up to page 2 of 3 at the bottom, please. So just scrolling up slightly. We'll see that you wrote an email to Simon Baker, and he said, Simon, can you go to Alana with this request for the story, Post Office's story, as they are the experts. Who was Alana?
So Alana was Mark Davis's deputy in the communications team.
Okay. And why did you call it the story, an exclamation in speech marks?
I'm referring to what Mr. Flemington said further down in the email, and I'm not reading anything else into that at this point.
Okay, well, if we can move up then. After your request, Mr. Baker wrote to Alana Renner, copying you in with Mr. Flemington and Miss Crichton. Please can help us craft our message around the second site review. We need to combat the assertion that the review is acknowledgement that there is a problem with Horizon. John Ale has drafted some words below. Do they strike the right tone? So what we see here is the purpose of the story is to stop anyone saying that Post Office are acknowledging that there's a problem with Horizon.
And I think it's important here that in the second site review, Horizon was used as a more generic term than just the computer. So here, I don't know if Simon is saying problem with Horizon as the computer rather than the wider Horizon. Clearly, the wider Horizon is also very important.
Okay. If we could then scroll up to the next email, which is Roland and Kelleher, the 27th of July 2012 at 11:27. So he writes to Simon Baker, you're copied in again, and he says, as this message will most probably find its way into the media, we need to get the message across from the start that we continue to have full confidence in the robustness of the Horizon system. And I suggest the following tweaking to the proposed wording from John Ale. And if you scroll down to the bottom of that letter, the tweak, so to speak, just waiting for that to come down, and then you can see the final sentence. It's not part of a sentence, it's a sentence on its own. When the system has been challenged in criminal courts, it has been successfully defended. So the expert, as you put it, looked into this, and when it came back and it was given sort of a final draft treatment, that sentence remained, didn't it?
Yes, and that's appalling.
And then going up to the top then, we've got, or the second from the top email, Ronan, that works, thanks Simon, so everything seemed to be fine with that. And then the last email in the chain, which was from Jarnail Singh to Hugh Flemington. There's been some redaction there, but we can see your name,
yep.
Susan Crichton's name. Dear Hugh, Susan Ulwin, you've seen the final draft of and then our story. Can this now be released to our agents and counsel for consistent approach and submissions when there is? I think that's probably a typing mistake. And then challenges to Horizon, regards, Jarnail. And so the question I wanted to ask you is, who are the agents, who are our agents who this was going to go out to?
I don't know who he means by our agents, unless it's sub-postmasters.
So other sub-postmasters.
Yes, that's what I'm assuming. But
and then perhaps more troubling, this was going to go out to counsel. Surely that means that this was going to be used by barristers in cases against sub-postmasters.
well, that's why I said it was appalling.
Yeah. And do you accept, having said that it was appalling, that Post Office must have known that there had been Horizon acquittals?
Horizon what?
Horizon acquittals, sorry. I'll move the microphone. Horizon acquittals. And deliberately put out a false account to cover that up.
So I don't know who on this email chain would have known. Whether Mr. Singh knew, I don't know. But there, you would have imagined that the lawyers on this email chain would have known about the prosecutions brought against sub-postmasters.
Thank you. And this, the date of this, the 31st of July, you were the company's secretary at that point, weren't you? And did you present the story or show the story to the board?
I cannot remember doing so, but I may have shared it with Alice.
Okay. I'm just going to see if I have any more questions. Finally, can you explain why it was called Our Story in inverted commas?
I think it's because right at the beginning of the email, Hugh Flemington unfortunately calls it a story, and that's continued all the way up the email, and I think that's why.
So it's a deliberate use of words, isn't it?
Yes, it's deliberate in this email, but in terms of our story, I think it's just saying what is the Post Office want to say about this. That's.
I have any further questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
We have Ms. Shah from the NFSP. She's assured me she's going to be 7 minutes. And then we have briefly Ms. Patrick as well.
Right, okay.
Where am I looking?
Good afternoon, Ms. Lyons. Can you hear me?
Hello, I can, yes.
So I represent the NFSP at the inquiry. I'm going to be referring to sections of your witness statement, but this does not need to be brought up unless you wish to review these sections. We saw in your witness statement and in your evidence that your parents ran a sub-post office. We saw in your... Is that okay? Yeah. So we saw in your witness statement that your parents ran a sub-post office, and I think that your father was also a previous General Secretary of the NFSP from 1980 to 1991, is that correct?
It's correct, yes.
And at paragraphs 32 and 33 of your witness statement, you describe your role as including the disciplining of sub-postmasters. This inquiry has heard a great deal about the overzealous, aggressive and intrusive way in which audits and investigations were carried out, with an attitude of guilty from the outset, terminology used such as offender reports. In fact, you would have been part of that way of working, wouldn't you?
No, I don't believe so. I mean, I had no part of the investigation procedures, or I was the area manager or retail network manager between 91 and 95, as you say in paragraph 32. I spent most of my time trying to help sub-postmasters and support them. If something happened, which meant that there was an issue at an office, I believe that I would approach things in an even-handed way and would have listened to the sub-postmaster as well as listening to investigation or whatever.
So you wouldn't accept that, given that we have heard about this culture of guilty until proven innocent, that given your family background in a sub-post office and the family background in the NFSP, there was not much empathy being shown in this disciplining of sub-postmasters when you were in your role?
So I'm saying that I don't agree with you in terms of my empathy with sub-postmasters. In 91 to 95, the investigation part of the business was in Royal Mail Group. And that was a very different culture to how we dealt with sub-postmasters and tried to help sub-postmasters during this time. So I would really disagree that I was heavy-handed with sub-postmasters at all.
Okay. At paragraph 49 of your witness statement, you talk about your role as head of directly managed branches. What was taking place during that time with the disciplining and/or prosecutions of Crown Office personnel?
So it was a very different regime because they were employees, not agents, and there was an HR process, which meant that if someone at an office, there was a problem with someone in a Crown office, then they would be part of the they're employees, so they would be dealt with very differently than sub-postmasters.
And how about prosecutions?
I can't remember any prosecutions, but I might have misremembered that. But I can't remember any prosecutions specifically about Horizon issues.
In your role, what discussions did you have with unions who represented Crown Office employees about the approach to disciplining and prosecutions, albeit you can't remember any prosecutions regarding Horizon specifically?
So I had a lot of discussions with the CWU about the people issues and trying to work with them actually to try and make sure that our people were looked after as well as, so I had lots of discussions with the CWU.
So from your knowledge in your various roles, which have been discussed today, can you describe the differences in the level of disciplinary action and sanctions between sub-postmasters and Crown Office cases?
So at this point, I wasn't dealing with sub-postmasters at all. I believe in the Crown Office cases, if someone had a loss on the counter, they would be, I believe they could have so many losses within so many months of time. I can't remember specifically, but they would have, they would get some additional training maybe if they were new, or they would have support, because in a Crown Office you've got a branch manager standing there who can be helping them with any issues on the counter.
So are you aware of the reason for the differences between Crown Office staff who are employed and self-employed small business people as to the level and attitude towards disciplinary action and or sanctions?
So they were on a very different contract, so that's why it was different. One was an employee and one was an agent.
So would your evidence be that it's nothing to do with the ability to recover funds from sub-postmasters?
I don't believe it was.
Okay. At paragraph 360 of your witness statement, you say that your pride in working for the post office is now tainted by what has happened. Do you not understand or accept your own either active or passive role in what has happened?
Yes, I do understand that. That's why my 34 years at the business, which I was very proud of when I left, is tainted, and it's very difficult because something that you are very proud of like that is suddenly not right to be proud of it anymore.
Would you accept that, given your family background in a sub-post office and your family background in the NFSP, it might be said that you took the saying poacher turned gamekeeper to the extreme?
I find that quite offensive, actually. My family background, I think, enabled me to understand some of the issues that sub-postmasters were going through, and at no point did I think I was poacher turned gamekeeper. I believed that through all my career, I did a lot to help sub-postmasters.
Is that it, Ms. Shah?
I've got a few more short questions, sir. Sorry. Would you accept that you shut your mind to the consequences of everything you knew and ought to have taken further, and that directly or indirectly led to sub-postmasters being wrongly prosecuted?
So in hindsight,
I don't think the witness could answer that because she wasn't in any relevant post at any relevant time to this inquiry when people were being prosecuted.
Okay, sir. Okay. Would you agree that your actions directly or indirectly led to organisations and unions such as the NFSP and the CWU being misled to keep their concern to a minimum and avoid them putting their support behind the JFSA?
So I don't believe my actions did that. I believe that I was acting in good faith. I believed that the information I was given from experts within the business, and I relied on that information. If I had a regret, it's that I relied on information from people who I considered to be experts without demanding more proof.
That concludes my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Shah. Ms. Patrick?
Thank you, sir. Miss Lyons, my name's Angela Patrick. I represent a number of sub-postmasters who were convicted and have since had their convictions overturned. You might be glad to hear I've only got one document I want to ask you about. And it's about the Deloitte work that Mr. Blake has already asked you about. Now, he's asked you about April and May in the minutes in 2014. I want to look at one document which comes a little after that, which is Paul 30-29733. And if we could look at the bottom third of page 1, I'd be grateful. We can see there at the very bottom third of that page, we see an email from you, Miss Lyons. Can you see that?
Yes.
And it's dated the 4th of June 2014. And I don't need to read those names, but do you accept that's the board?
Yes.
So it's a message from you to the board, and it's forwarding, and we see the header there, Deloitte briefing, message from Chris Ojard and Leslie Sewell, and it's marked strictly private and confidential, subject to legal privilege. And the message says, you're forwarding a message from Chris Ojard and Leslie Sewell, and you attach the Deloitte's briefing. Just for fullness, if we scroll up a little, we can see the message. It goes over onto page 2 as well. We don't need to read it all out because it's quite long. But, sorry, scroll down. See, dear all, as detailed in the board update sent last Saturday, please find attached the Deloitte's final draft board briefing received by us late this afternoon. And if you go down, It talks about features of the Horizon system, which operates to provide sub-postmasters with full ownership and visibility of their branch ledger, which maintains a complete and accurate audit trail. And the next paragraph, the briefing strives to be succinct and intelligible. However, the subject matter and scope to the review remains somewhat technical. And there's some bullet points which provide a summary. We don't need to go into those for now, but I just want to ask you one question. You circulate this message with the attachment and the summary to the board. Now, you've said you didn't, in April and May, read the Deloitte report, the original version. And I think your evidence is that until you were shown it by the inquiry, you hadn't seen the original report. Is that right?
That's my belief, yes.
Now, so you wouldn't have checked this summary accurately reflected the original?
No, because I wouldn't be able to do so.
And you don't recall asking to see the original at this time?
I don't recall asking.
I just want to ask you and to check whether this helps your memory on who might have completed the summary for the board and helped with the Deloitte summary. Now, was it Mr. Ojard and Miss Sewell who would have asked you to circulate this message?
Can we go down? Keep going down for a minute to see who the signatory.
Of course.
Yes. So this message has come from Leslie and Chris, and that's who I'm circulating on behalf of. Now, that doesn't mean I didn't check with someone before I did that. So I might have checked with Paula, for instance. It doesn't look as if I checked with Alice. So we're expecting this update and from Leslie and Chris. So I'm circulating it on their behalf.
Okay. And if we scroll up to the very top of this document, we see that you circulate it separately to Roderick Williams. Can you see that there at the top?
Yes.
And you say, sorry, should have CC'd you in as you did all the work. Now, you're circulating a message from Mr. Ojard and Leslie Sewell. Can you remember now which of both of them might have asked you to circulate the document?
No, I can't.
And you're forwarding it to Mr. Williams saying, should have CC'd you in because essentially you did all the work. Does that help your memory on who was involved in the preparation of the final summary for the board with Deloitte?
So Roderick was a lawyer, and I'm reading into this now that he had the connection with Deloitte, and that he was, and so I would have said it was Chris Ojard, but that's only because I'm saying here that a lawyer did all the work.
Thank you, Ms. Lyons. That's all the questions we have for you.
Is that it, Mr. Blake?
It is, yes. Thank you, sir.
Well, thank you very much, Ms. Lyons, for producing a detailed witness statement and for coming to the inquiry today to answer very many questions. I'm grateful for your participation.
Thank you.
So we'll resume tomorrow morning with Ms. Fennells, I take it.
That's correct, sir, yes.
Jolly good. Thank you.